Draco Malfoy, and the year when suddenly everyone paid attention to him. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 4. A New Age. Of sorts. Between the Half-Blood Prince's book and the fallout of Harry using it in class, Harry's at times inexplicably up behavior and their methods of homework, it took Draco a while to realize that Hagrid was being distant with them. It was only when they passed him in the corridors one afternoon and he failed to greet them, instead staring blankly ahead and completely ignoring their presence, that Draco noticed that their friend actually hadn't spoken to them since the beginning of term. When he turned to point this out to Harry, Hermione, and Weasley, the three Gryffindors looked squeamish and guilty. Like they, unlike him, were well aware of the problem. "What is it?" Draco asked sharply. "What am I missing?"
"Well," Hermione said heavily, "you do realise, don't you, that none of us took up care of magical creatures on Newt level?"
Draco's eyes widened and he stopped at his tracks. He hadn't even considered the possibility. It wasn't that he'd hated the subject exactly. It wasn't his favorite, mind you. It was just that he'd modeled his timetable after what would be best suited for his potential career choices, and Hagrid's subject had fit nowhere in there. "I'll get over it." Weasley had shrugged, shaking Draco out of his ponderings. "He can't be angry with us because of it forever, can't he?" Draco threw a glance at Harry, who kept silent, but looked just as conflicted as Draco felt. The subject did not come up again until the weekend, when Hagrid had even failed to turn up at the breakfast table, his absence not going unnoticed by the four of them.
"We've got to go and explain,"
Hermione urged, turning pleading eyes to Draco, as if she knew that he'd be her most likely ally on this quest. "We've got Quidditch tryouts this morning," Weasley protested, "and we're supposed to be practicing that Unwanted charm for Flitwick. Anyway, explain what? How are we going to tell him we hated his stupid subject?"
"We didn't hate it,"
Hermione protested. "Speak for yourself. I haven't forgotten the Scroots," Weasley muttered darkly. "I agree that we can't leave it at that," Draco injected, choosing to ignore Weasley's rambling. "Hermione, our timetables are so full. He can't seriously have expected us to take up his subject as well. If we explain it to him properly, he will understand. Plus, Harry's got so much on his mind outside of school, and he's got Dumbledore's lessons as well, so he has an excuse too. Well, Weasley has none, but if we play it smart, no one will notice." Weasley glowered at him from across the table, but Draco did not look up to meet his gaze. "We'll go down after Quidditch," Harry agreed, "but trials might take all morning, the number of people who have applied." He looked slightly nauseous at the thought, muttering, "I don't know why the team's this popular all of a sudden."
"Oh, come on, Harry." Hermione rolled her eyes, her tone impatient. "It's not Quidditch that's popular, it's you!"
Harry's eyes widened as he gaped at her, and Draco couldn't help but crack a smile at Harry's complete obliviousness. Draco had been well aware of Harry's sudden popularity, of course. Girls had been milling around in big eyes and wide smiles, hopeful to get notice. If not for Harry's clear disinterest in them, it would have driven Draco insane. Now, though, with the obvious horror in Harry's eyes, he even found it amusing.
"You've never been more interesting,"
Hermione spelled it out for him, and Draco watched as Harry's skin turned darker with each word, discomfort clearly written in every line of his face.
"And frankly, you've never been more fanciful."
Weasley made a choking sound next to him, and Hermione glared at him before continuing.
"Everyone knows you're telling the truth now, don't they? The whole wizarding world has had to admit that you were right about Voldemort being back, and that you really have fought him twice in the last 2 years and escaped both times. And now they're calling you the chosen one. Well, come on, can't you see why people are fascinated by you?"
Harry looked like he certainly couldn't, and like he wanted to disappear underneath his invisibility cloak until people forgot about his existence again. Draco shook his head, suppressing a grin, as he took a sip of his juice. Hermione proceeded to try and convince Harry of his own charms for a while longer, until Weasley got jealous and tried to divert the attention to himself. And wasn't that interesting? And the conversation was only interrupted when the post owls arrived, delivering the Daily Prophet and Harry and Weasley's new potions books. Harry then earned Hermione's wrath by simply switching the covers of the Half-Blood Prince's book with the new one, declaring his intention to keep the old volume to himself, along with all its helpful instructions. The mood was, therefore, a little more tense between them as they made their way down to the Quidditch pitch together, and Harry put a little distance between himself and Hermione, rather choosing to walk ahead with Draco. "What do you think you're doing coming down here with us anyway?" he asked when they were already halfway down to the field, the stands starting to cast shadows over them. You're the Slytherin captain. Your competition. You're not supposed to watch my trials. Draco snorted, raising an eyebrow at him. Do you really think I'll miss this? He scoffed. All these people fawning over you because you're the famous Harry Potter and you losing your mind over it. I'm just sorry I haven't brought sweets along for everyone's enjoyment. It's gonna be the entertainment of my week. Some friend you are, he grumbled. The very best. Draco grinned, elbowing him. Gotta keep your head the right size after all. I'm still pretty sure this counts as fine. Well, come to the Slytherin tryouts tomorrow morning if it bothers you so much. Then we're even. Fine, I will, Harry promised, a challenge in his eyes, and Draco laughed, shaking his head at him. They had to part ways once they reached the pitch, Harry and Weasley leaving for the changing rooms, and Hermione and Draco finding a seat in the already crowded stands. Hermione had not been wrong with her assessment. The crowds were indeed insane. Not only were tons of people trying out, most of them less than talented, some of them not even Gryffindors, but it seemed like half the population of Hogwarts was out here watching too, making the stadium almost as crowded as it was on a match day. Draco was so amused after about half an hour of watching that his cheeks hurt from laughing, and Hermione kept nudging him to stop, though she was smiling herself. You really shouldn't enjoy his suffering so much, she commented. But just look at how worked up he gets, Draco chortled. He looks like he's about to hex the next person who as much as smiles at him. You really don't seem very allergic to only attention, Hermione grinned, shaking her head. Draco opened his mouth to say something else, but then someone took the free seat next to him and Draco looked up, surprised. He instantly sobered when he found himself face to face with Parvati Patil, who, despite having her friend Lavender Brown on her other side, was turned completely towards him, a bright smile on her face. Hello, Draco, she said, and Draco blinked. Hello, he replied, a little uncertain. Fancy seeing you here, she grinned. Ever since the DA stopped meeting, we haven't been able to talk much. So how have you been? Draco said rather eloquently, wondering when he had ever exchanged as much as 2 words with Patel before the start of this school year. Fine, I guess. Good, she smiles. That's good. Congrats on making it captain of the Slytherin team, by the way. I know I'm supposed to root for Gryffindor, but I think I might be cheering for you this time around. Draco repeated, feeling more unsettled with every word from her mouth. Thanks? That's... He didn't know how to finish the sentence, so he left it hanging in the air. So, I was wondering, she pressed on, and her dark eyes were sparkling with excitement and what was clearly hope. There's a Hogsmeade trip scheduled for October, right? And if you have nothing planned, maybe we could go together? Draco stared. Patil smiled back at him, expectant. It took various seconds for Draco to find his voice. I'm sorry, he managed, clearing his throat. I already made plans with Harry and Hermione. Oh, she said, her face falling. I see. Well, maybe next time? Sure, Draco replied, a little helplessly. There was a tense silence, and then Lavender linked arms with her, and they got to their feet. See you around, Draco, she said, smiling, and then they disappeared back to where they had come from, much to Draco's relief. Oh, Merlin! Draco groaned, burrowing his head in his hands. That was mortifying! Hermione, who had been quietly sitting next to him throughout the entire exchange, started to giggle helplessly. Oh my God! She wheezed. I never should have been laughing. I'm sorry, but this is just too good. You look like you were going to die. What does she want from me? Draco moaned, resurfacing from his hands to look at her for help. Why does she keep doing this? I think that's pretty obvious, Hermione snorted, making Draco whine, and Hermione laughed harder. You and Harry are both something else, you know, she muttered, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. Other boys would kill to have pretty girls fawning over them, and you panic and want it to stop. Well, you know exactly why I wanted to stop, Draco deadpanned. I'm not interested. I don't care how pretty they are. Well, they can't know you're Harry sexual, Hermione shot back, making Draco splutter. Anyway, you should look at this as a good thing. Or
Or are you really going to tell me that Harry hasn't been practically exploding with jealousy every time Parvati has been flirting with you?
Draco frowned, eyeing her wearily. Hermione raised her eyebrows at him, staring him down.
Oh dear,
She sighed, sounding tired now.
you're still in denial, aren't you? You're still telling yourself he's not interested.
Hermione, Draco muttered. Stop!
No, she argued. I won't. This is ridiculous, Draco. You ought to realise how much more aware Harry has been of you lately. Yes, I know Harry's oblivious, and I know it took him a long time. But I really think he's starting to figure it out now. I mean, the whole way he's been acting around you has changed.
Draco opened his mouth, ready to deny it, but he held in, biting his lip. Because Harry's behavior had indeed changed as of late. Starting with that bizarre incident where he had run out on Draco halfway through their study session, to moments where he would be unable to meet his eyes, seem flustered or unreasonably frustrated without wanting to explain himself. And then there had been that moment on the grounds where the eyes had met and they... But no, it couldn't be. No, Draco said out loud, shaking his head.
Draco!
Hermione sighed, her tone annoyed, but Draco cut her off before she could dive into a lecture. No, you listen to me, he told her. If I convince myself that he feels the same way now when I'm wrong, I'm never going to recover. Our friendship is never going to recover. That can't happen, not with the war ahead. So please, just do me a favor and don't. There was pain in Hermione's eyes now, and Draco had to make himself look away, out over the field to where Harry had started the beaters tryout. Hermione reached out to take Draco's hand, entwining their fingers and squeezing.
Why won't you just let yourself be happy? She whispered. He feels the same way. I know he does.
Draco gulped, shaking his head. If he really does, I'll let it happen. But until I know for sure, I won't believe it.
And when will you believe it?
Hermione demanded and edged her voice.
When he hits Parvati with a body bang spell for touching you.
No, Draco shook his head. If he makes it clear that he's really interested in more than friendship, then I'll be the last person to say no to that. But until then, I won't push and destroy what we have, just because you or Ginny or Luna or whoever you have been talking to that day have a hunch. Hermione sighed, shaking her head.
You're so stubborn, she said sadly. It could be so much easier.
In that moment, Harry switched over to Chasers and Beaters tryout, and Lavender let out an embarrassing squeal directed at Weasley, making Hermione's face go sour. Oh! Draco noted dryly, side-eyeing her. You mean like you and Weasley? Yes, you are really leading by example.
I don't know what you're talking about,
she said stiffly. Oh, please. Draco rolled his eyes. Let's address the arrangement in the room. I don't understand it, but there is definitely something going on there. If Harry has been, as you put it, exploding with jealousy over Batil, you have been ready to behead her charming friend. Don't even try to deny it. At the same time, Weasley has been losing it this morning over you praising Harry but not paying any attention to him. It's the most sickening mating dance I have ever seen, and we've studied Scroots in heat. Hermione was pink by the time Draco had finished, and she was trying to withdraw her hand from his, but Draco held on, squeezing in comfort, his touch at odds with his harsh words.
He's a complete idiot!
Hermione burst out indignantly. He is, Draco agreed.
He's so prejudiced most of the time and so insensitive, and he just doesn't bother to look past his own nose more times than not, and he's driving me insane!
Why don't all accounts? Draco nodded, waiting. But I just... Hermione muttered, biting her lip.
I don't know what it is myself. I guess he just makes me feel. He works me up so much. I can't help but not notice him, not be aware of him.
There was a short pause before she muttered,
I know you two don't get along and you probably never will. And I get that. I even get why. And it should bother me as your best friend. But still, I can't stop myself from caring. I care about him. I care what he thinks about me. It doesn't make sense.
She finished, looking utterly frustrated with herself. Feelings never do, Draco told her soothingly. And they don't have to. If you like him, you like him. You don't have to explain it.
Does it bother you?
She whispered, looking up at him. Why would it bother me? Draco asked, honestly confused.
When I know you're kind of sensitive about Harry and Ron's friendship, she sighed. And now that I have feelings for him too, You're not going to start feeling second best again, are you?
Draco smiled at that, elbowing her. I can't believe you even thought of me in that equation, he scolded. No, I'm not going to throw a tantrum over you wanting to snog Weasley and not me. No offense, but I'm quite relieved you don't want to snog me, he finished teasingly. Hermione snorted, shaking her head and looking back at the field.
You're impossible,
she noted, and then made a face and shuddered. Draco followed her gaze to see a smarmy sixth-year Gryffindor waving up at her, trying to get her attention. Well, Draco noted, raising his eyebrows. Looks like I'm not the only one with unwanted admirers.
That's McCarrigan,
she muttered, feeling sick.
He's been trying to ask me out since the beginning of the year. He's a pest.
Well, Draco frowned. He really shouldn't make it onto the team then. That would be horrible for Harry.
Don't worry,
Hermione muttered, wand in hand, as she watched McLaggen mouthing his broom and making his way towards the oops.
I won't let that happen.
Draco snorted, shaking his head in amusement. I'll make a Slytherin out of you and Harry yet, he told her. My influence is clearly coming through. After Hermione had thrown a discreet, well-timed Confundus charm at McLaggen for his last save and he had missed, Weasley was chosen once more as a keeper for Gryffindor's team. Ginny, too, was chosen for a position as a chaser, and Katie Bell was the only other returning face among a couple of newfounds Harry had chosen. The beaters seemed average at best, but the new girl he chose as chaser seemed to have potential and was worth keeping an eye on during the first match when Slytherin would face off against them. Harry seemed dazzled and exhausted when they met up with him once the tryouts had ended, but Weasley was ecstatic in giving them a never-ending retell of his saves of the day, which only Hermione indulged him in as they made their way across the grounds towards Hagrid's cabin. The following conversation with Hagrid was, in short, unpleasant. Their friend was definitely holding a grudge against them for dropping a subject without prior explanation, and it took a lot of groveling and diplomatically phrased justifications for him to finally soften and invite them in for tea. But when they left, things had thankfully been resolved between them, much to Draco's relief. There was little he hated more than fighting with Hagrid. They made it into school just before dinner, where Slughorn caught them in the entrance hall to ask Harry and Hermione for a private supper with a couple of chosen students in his quarters that very night. He completely ignored Weasley's and Draco's presence in the process, and while Draco was neither surprised nor particularly chafed, Weasley seemed extremely bothered by that fact. Harry, though, was quick to make excuses, which even happened to be valid. I can't, Professor. I've got detention with Professor Snape.
Oh, dear,
called Slughorn, sounding unreasonably stressed at the news.
Dear, I was counting on you, Harry. Well, now, I'll just have to have a word with Severus and explain the situation. I'm sure I'll be able to persuade him to postpone your detention. Yes, I'll see you both later.
Draco tried hard to suppress a snort as he watched him go, shaking his head. Yeah, right, he muttered, as he meant Snape. I know, Harry frowned. This detention's already been postponed once. Snape did it for Dumbledore. He won't do it for anyone else.
Oh, I wish you could come. I don't want to go on my own,
Hermione whined. I doubt you'll be alone. Ginny'll probably be invited.
Weasley snapped.
Oh, Marlin, Draco muttered. Please take your pity party elsewhere, will you? So we're not Slughorn's favorites. Who cares? Get over it, Weasley. I won't listen to you moping over this for the next year or so. Weasley glowered at him and headed for the Great Hall without another word. Hermione and Harry exchanged a pained look and followed reluctantly. Draco rolled his eyes and trailed after them. Slytherin tryouts the next morning were much less packed than the Gryffindor ones had been, though Harry stuck to his word of showing up to watch it, and much to his shock and distress, Patil and Brown came to watch as well. They did not speak to him after, though Draco assumed that was due solely to the death glare Harry was giving the pair of them. But their chatter and giggles were occasionally audible across the field, making Draco flush uncomfortably. Draco tried to keep his eyes and mind on his task, though, and the assignment was made easier by the relative lack of candidates that had signed up for the tryouts this year. Draco had the suspicion that most usual candidates had shied away from the team due to Draco's captaincy. Some Death Eater sons might have chosen to boycott him on principle, and people who had made the team due to name and connections in prior years knew better than to try the same with him. So the people who had turned up that morning were a bunch of people that were, quite surprisingly, actually invested in Quidditch, and some of them were really talented, making Draco's choice easy. In the end, he made the unusual decision to go for an alternate position in the team, one that hadn't existed in Slytherin in 98 years, according to records. That decision was prompted by the fact that he was faced with one incredibly good chaser, a 7th-year girl called Viola Richmond, who'd apparently been pointedly ignored by both Montague and Flint for reasons Draco couldn't fathom, and 3 other equally talented candidates. Another 7th year, a boy named Yetin Hagrid, and 2 non-identical twin sisters in their 3rd year named Zoe and Karina Accrington. So Draco decided to guarantee only Viola a spot and keep the other 3 around permanently for practice, deciding match to match whose form was best. Zoe and Karina seemed relieved for that matter. Driven as they were, they had apparently been worried that their ambition would present a source of bitterness between them in case only one of the sisters got chosen. Draco's new beaters were nothing like Crabbe and Goyle. It was important to him to choose someone with actual brains this time around, and he thought that the 4th year Abbas Issa, who'd initially appeared much too bookish for the pitch, but had then performed brilliantly, and the 5th year Ryan Owens, who had such a big mouth and bright personality that he quickly promised to become the life and soul of the team, were perfect choices in his opinion. The biggest surprise of the day, though, was Draco's new keeper. Eureka Haneda was a tiny 5th year girl, and from her stature, he'd have never put her between the hoops. But then he watched her snatch one quaffle after the next out of the air, moving in a speed that had Draco speechless, and he firmly had to remind himself why prejudices were a dangerous thing. "Damn, your team is good," Harry muttered as he caught up with him after the tryouts, looking honestly impressed. "That keeper?" "I know!" Draco smirked in glee. "We're going to do you in, Harry." "We'll see about that." Harry glared half-heartedly, but he didn't look honestly worried. There was a moment of silence between them as Draco locked up the changing rooms. "So," he said finally, trying and failing to sound casual, "Parvati was here for you earlier." "I saw," Draco said darkly. "I think she likes you," Harry said. His voice sounded strange, and Draco's heart fluttered. He did not want to let himself hope, but Hermione did have a point. Harry was acting strange about the whole Patil thing. "Unfortunately, it seems that way," Draco said, not meeting his eyes. "I'm trying to let her down gently, but she doesn't seem to get the message." "Whoa," Harry said, and there was silence once more. Then, "So you're not interested in her?" "No," Draco confirmed, voice firm. He needed Harry to not misunderstand that part. "Not at all." "Oh," Harry said again. "Good, I see." Silence one more, and then Harry quite abruptly returned to the subject of Quidditch, seeming much more tearful.